Evelyn Hart had never thought a single morning could change the rhythm of her life. But that Friday felt different from the moment she stepped into Harbor Lane Cafe. The air outside was cold enough to sting her cheeks. But inside the cafe, everything smelled warm, fresh muffins, roasted beans, and the sweet comfort that came with routine. She chose her usual seat near the window, opened her laptop, and tried to settle into her work. But something inside her felt restless. For months, everything in her life had been predictable. She woke up early, walked to the same cafe in downtown Seattle, sat at the same table, and pretended she was fine. Her last relationship had ended quietly, no fights, no loud breakup, just a slow fading until she barely recognized herself. She didn't tell people how much it hurt or how it made her question her own worth. She simply stayed silent, like most people do when they're trying to protect themselves. That morning, she tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting. She felt tired of being lonely, tired of pretending she didn't want connection. But she didn't know how to start again. So she simply hid behind her coffee and hoped the world wouldn't notice. Then the cafe door opened and everything inside her shifted. A man walked in tall, calm, with dark hair damp from the morning rain. His presence wasn't loud, but it was strong enough to make the energy in the room feel different. He stepped inside slowly, taking a moment to brush off the cold, and then lifted his eyes to look around. The moment his gaze swept across the room, Evelyn felt something strange. His eyes paused on her just for a second. Uck! But long enough to make her heartbeat stutter. She looked down at her laptop, pretending she hadn't noticed. But inside, she felt a sudden spark of something new: curiosity, attraction, maybe even hope. She wasn't sure. He stepped into the line waiting to order his drink, but every few moments he looked over again. Not boldly, not in a way that made her uncomfortable. More like he was trying to remember something he couldn't quite place. Evelyn told herself she must be reading it wrong. She wasn't the kind of woman strangers stared at. She wasn't wearing anything special, just her soft gray sweater, her jeans, her hair tied loosely in a bun. Nothing about her looked like she was trying to impress anyone. If anything, she looked like someone hiding from attention. But he kept looking, and each time their eyes almost met. Her stomach tightened. She tried to stay focused, typing anything to keep her hands busy. But she couldn't ignore the way the air felt different since he walked in. She could feel him in the room like a quiet, pull-steady strange, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. When his drink was ready, he turned and scanned the busy cafe for an empty table. There was only one open seat left. And she already knew where it was, right across from her. He hesitated for a moment, almost as if he didn't want to disturb her. But then he walked over with a polite nod. "Is this seat taken?" His voice was gentle, warm, carrying a sincerity that made her sit straighter. She shook her head. "No, go ahead." He thanked her and sat down, placing his cup on the table with a kind of carefulness that made her wonder what type of person he was. Someone thoughtful, maybe patient, someone who treated even small things with intention. She tried to keep working, but she could feel his gaze every few moments. Not in a way that made her nervous, but in a way that made her feel seen for the first time in a long time. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat softly. "I'm sorry if this sounds strange," he said, leaning forward just a little. "But do we know each other?" Evelyn's fingers froze over the keyboard. Her heart gave a small, unexpected jump. She looked up, and for the first time she met his eyes directly. They were warm, curious, and honest brown with a hint of something deeper she couldn't quite read. She shook her head. "I don't think so." He smiled with a bit of embarrassment, running a hand through his hair. "I thought so too. When I walked in, something about you felt familiar. Like I was supposed to recognize you." Supposed to? The words struck something inside her, not because they made sense, but because they somehow didn't. Most men she'd met recently were either distracted, guarded, or uninterested. But this man was none of that. He seemed completely present, like he was actually noticing her, not just looking at her. And it had been a long time since someone made her feel that way. She closed her laptop slowly, not because she wanted to flirt, But because she wanted to understand why he felt familiar to why, his presence stirred something warm but fragile inside her chest. "Well," she said softly, "here I am." The moment she said it, his expression shifted. His eyes widened just slightly, like he wasn't expecting her to respond that way. For a second, it felt like something invisible pulled tight between them: curiosity, attraction, recognition, whatever it was. He seemed ready to say something else, maybe something honest, maybe something important, but before he could, the cafe door opened again. This time, a woman walked in. Her voice cut across the room, clear and direct. "Daniel, are you coming?" The name hit the air like a soft interruption. Evelyn blinked, the moment breaking apart inside her. The woman looked around the cafe until her eyes landed on him. She gave a small wave, waiting. Daniel, now she had a name for him, looked back at the woman and then down at his coffee. Something in his posture changed. He looked conflicted, almost frustrated, like he didn't want to get up yet. He stood slowly, gathering his things with a quiet sigh. He turned to Evelyn like he didn't want the moment to end. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I didn't mean to interrupt your morning." "You didn't?" she answered, a little too quickly. He smiled, a small, meaningful smile, one that lingered. He took a step toward the door. But then he paused halfway, as if he remembered something he hadn't said yet. He turned back to her, eyes soft, thoughtful, and full of something unsent, and that look hit her harder than any words could have. It wasn't a look of apology. It wasn't a look of distraction. It was a look that said, this wasn't supposed to be the end. Then he walked out with the woman leaving. Evelyn sitting at the small round table with the warm echo of a moment that shouldn't have mattered as much as it did, but it did. She felt it in her chest, like a chord someone had finally touched after years of silence. She told herself to forget it, to shake it off, to finish her work and move on with her day. After all, he didn't know her, and she didn't know him. He was just a stranger who walked in, kept looking, and then walked out again. But the truth was simple. Something about him felt unfinished. Something about the way he looked at her felt like the start of a story she didn't realize she wanted. As the cafe returned to its usual calm, she touched the rim of her coffee cup and whispered to herself, why did it feel like he knew me? She didn't know the answer, not yet, but deep down, in a quiet place inside her heart, she felt certain of one thing. This wasn't the last time she would see Daniel, not even close. Evelyn woke up that Saturday morning with a strange mix of excitement and nerves she hadn't felt in years. The memory of Daniel's gaze the day before replayed in her mind, vivid and persistent. She had tried to convince herself it was just a fleeting moment, a strange coincidence, but her heart refused to listen. Something about him had lingered, an echo she couldn't shake. She dressed quickly in her usual, casual clothes, but added a small touch of soft scarf she liked, one that she thought looked nice without being too noticeable. She told herself it was just a morning routine, but deep down she knew it was for him, whoever he was. She arrived at Harbor Lane Cafe earlier than usual. The streets were quiet, and the sky carried a soft gray light that made the city feel calm, almost intimate. She entered the cafe, the familiar smells of coffee and fresh pastries wrapping around her, comforting yet charged with the memory of the day before. Her usual table awaited by the window, and she sat down, opening her laptop and pretending to work. But her focus wasn't on her screen, it was on the door. Minutes passed. Customers came and went. The barista moved behind the counter, calling names and pouring drinks. Evelyn kept her eyes up, scanning every person who entered. Each time the door opened, her chest jumped, but no one looked like him. She wondered if he would come back today, or if yesterday had just been a strange coincidence. Maybe she was imagining the connection. Maybe she was overthinking everything. But her heart refused to lie then, just as the clock struck 9:30. She saw him, Daniel. He walked in with the same quiet confidence she remembered. His hair was damp from the light drizzle outside, and he wore a soft blue jacket that complemented his calm presence. The cafe seemed to shrink around him. Everything else faded into the background. His eyes scanned the room, focused, deliberate, until they found her. When their gazes met, Evelyn felt the same strange pull she had felt yesterday. Stronger this time, almost magnetic. He smiled, small, hesitant, genuine. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't a trick. It was real. He walked over slowly, like he didn't want to rush anything, but his steps were steady, purposeful. "Good morning," he said softly, pulling out the chair across from her. "Mind if I sit?" She shook her head, smiling. Not at all. Her voice sounded lighter than she expected. A warmth spread through her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time, like the sun breaking through a cloudy sky. Daniel settled into the chair, placing his cup carefully on the table, almost as if it were fragile. He looked around briefly, then back at her, and for a long moment neither spoke. It was a silence filled with anticipation, filled with the electricity of curiosity and unspoken questions. Then he leaned forward slightly. "I owe you an explanation about yesterday," he said, voice low, sincere. "The woman you sit's my sister. She was helping me move into the city. I didn't want you to think, well, you know anything wrong." Evelyn blinked, relief washing over her. She hadn't known why this sudden interruption had left her chest aching, but now she understood. He wasn't unavailable. He hadn't been trying to avoid her. He was here, present, and honest. That mattered more than anything. "I see," she said softly. Her fingers curled around her coffee cup. "Thank you for telling me." Her eyes studied him in the way she had instinctively done yesterday, careful, yet curious, noticing small details. She noticed how his eyes had a quiet depth, like he carried stories he didn't often share. She noticed the way he held himself, relaxed but intentional. She noticed the faint smile lines around his eyes, the kind that came from laughter, not just life's challenges. Daniel exhaled slowly, like a weight had lifted from his shoulders. "I wasn't sure if I should come back," he admitted, "but I kept thinking about you, about how I felt when I walked in yesterday. It was like I'd seen you somewhere before, like there was something unfinished." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. His words weren't a line or a casual remark. They were honest, vulnerable. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to meet someone who spoke openly without walls, without hiding behind words. "You kept looking," she whispered, the truth spilling out. He nodded, a soft, almost shy acknowledgement. "I couldn't help it. I didn't want to look away. It felt wrong to look anywhere else." For a long time, they sat in silence, letting the moment stretch without forcing it. The cafe buzzed with quiet activity around them, but inside their little corner, time slowed. Every small gesture, the lift of an eyebrow, the tilt of a smile, the gentle movement of hands around cups felt meaningful. Evelyn realized she hadn't felt this level of connection with anyone in years. Not just attraction, but recognition, a sense that someone could see her without judgment, without pretense. Daniel broke the silence first. "I know this might sound crazy," he said, "but I feel like this is something worth exploring. I don't want it to be just a fleeting coincidence." Evelyn's heart fluttered. She didn't have to think about it. She already knew. "I don't want it to be just a coincidence either," she replied, her voice steady but soft. He smiled. That same small, real smile that made her feel like the world had opened a door for her. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand. Not in a formality, but in a connection. "Evelyn," she answered, placing her hand over his. The warmth of his touch wasn't electric or startling. It was grounding, safe, inviting. She realized how much she had missed this, the simple, human contact that carried meaning beyond words. They started talking slowly at first about ordinary things. The cafe, the city, small routines. Daniel asked about her favorite coffee, her weekend plans, and the little details of her mornings. Evelyn shared in return, hesitant but growing more comfortable with each word. There was no rush, no pressure. It's just a steady unfolding of two people who were curious about each other. As the morning passed, the conversation deepened. They shared stories about childhood memories, about family, about moments of heartbreak that shaped them. Evelyn spoke quietly about her last relationship, careful not to dwell on pain, but Daniel listened with a patience that felt rare. He didn't interrupt or offer cliches. He simply understood. And when it was his turn, he shared stories to moments of laughter, moments of challenge, moments where life had tested him. Evelyn found herself drawn not just to his words, but to the honesty behind them. At one point, Daniel laughed softly at something she said. And it wasn't just a casual laugh, it was genuine, the kind that reaches your eyes and your heart. Evelyn felt herself smiling without thinking, a warmth spreading through her chest. She realized she hadn't smiled like this in a long time, not without reservation, not without the weight of old fears holding her back. Time seemed to pass differently when he was there. The hours melted away, unnoticed, yet every second felt significant. They spoke about hopes for the future, about dreams they hadn't shared with anyone else. Daniel admitted he had been hesitant to approach her, worried she might see him as just another stranger. Evelyn admitted she had felt the same way, afraid of letting herself feel too much too soon. But the fear didn't dominate. They acknowledged it and chose to move past it, together in that small cafe corner by late morning. The sun had begun to peek through the clouds outside. A soft light fell across Evelyn's table, warming her face, highlighting the subtle expressions that Daniel noticed with care. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, looking at her in a way that felt entirely new to her. "Evelyn, I don't know where this will go," he said quietly. "I just know that I want to see where it could lead. I want to know you better, not just in moments like this, but in real life, if you'll let me." Her heart thumped so loudly she thought he might hear it. But there was no hesitation in her answer. She nodded slowly, smiling softly. "I want that too," she said. "I want to see where this goes." The cafe around them continued its quiet rhythm, unaware of the significance of the moment. But for Evelyn and Daniel, the world had shifted slightly, just enough to make everything feel new and possible. They finished their coffees, still talking, still laughing, still discovering the small details that made them curious about each other. Every glance, every smile, every gentle gesture deepened the connection. When it was finally time to leave, Daniel stood first. He placed his hand gently on the back of the chair, pausing as if to take in the moment fully. He looked at Evelyn with the same intensity he had carried when he first walked in. A look of certainty, admiration, and quiet affection. "I'll see you again," he said simply. "Yes," Evelyn replied without hesitation. "I'll be here." He smiled that small, honest smile again, and walked toward the door. But before stepping outside, he turned back one last time. There was no searching in his eyes, no doubt, only clarity and something unspoken but understood. It was a look that promised continuity, possibility, and hope. Evelyn felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't known in years. She watched him disappear into the city streets, to soft drizzle turning into a delicate sunlight reflection on the wet pavement. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like her life might be opening to something beautiful, something she hadn't dared to hope for before. Sitting back in her chair, she held her coffee close and exhaled slowly. She realized that life could still surprise her, that new chapters could begin when least expected, and that sometimes the right person walked in and simply kept looking until you noticed them.